the Jewish Passover. The Jew today is still remembering that as the point of contact with a saving God, which is tragic because they have to go right by the cross in the trip backwards, which they totally miss. But on that night before Jesus' death, while the disciples were eating the Passover meal, in the setting of that ancient feast, held in remembrance of God's redemption of Israel from the slavery of Egypt, Jesus took that meal and transformed it into a new meal. He took a cup from the Passover meal. He took bread from the Passover meal and made a tremendous transition when he said, this cup is my blood, this bread is my body, and this is something new that you do in remembrance of me. And now when we look at the great redemptive point in history, we don't go to Egypt, we go to Calvary. We don't look back at the blood on the doorpost and the lintel, we go back to the blood shed at the cross. That is the point of contact with God's redeeming, saving power. And that's what Jesus was doing that night before his death. He was transforming the Passover into the communion. And for the Christian then, the Passover has no significance. It's interesting to study and to understand and so forth. But for us, the Lord's table is the memorial that Christ himself has instituted. And no longer do we look back to redemptive types in Egypt. We look back to the redemptive antitype, the redemptive fulfillment that came in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ when he died on the cross and spilled his blood, cleanse us from our sin. In Mark chapter 14, verse 22, we get a little insight into what our Lord was doing. Mark 14:22 says this, and as they did eat, and what were they eating? They were eating the Passover meal in good Jewish tradition. As they did eat, Jesus took bread and blessed and broke it and gave to them and said, take, eat, this is my body. Now, we've seen the fact that he doesn't mean this literally as his body, but this is a symbol. He took the cup when he had given thanks, gave to them all, and they all drank of it. And he said, this is my blood of the New Testament, the new covenant. This is a new day. This is a new dawning. We're not going back to the memorials and the old patterns and the old covenant. This is something new. This is the new covenant. The New Testament means the same thing, which is shed for many. Verily I say to you, I will drink no more of the fruit of the vine till the day that I drink it new with you in the kingdom of God. Now, this is recorded in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and it's alluded to in John 13. It's commented on by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. So in all four Gospels, there is reference made to that evening in the experience of the Last Supper in the upper room when Jesus took the Passover meal and transformed it into the communion. Now this then became the normal celebration of the early church. Christ, desiring that the cross become the focal point and instituting this supper, thereby gave the church a way to continuously commemorate his death. And that is precisely what the early church did. Acts chapter 2 will help us to see that. Notice verse 41 and 42 of Acts chapter 2. Acts 2:41, then they that gladly received his word were baptized. And this is in response to the message of Peter given on the day of Pentecost. The same day there were added, and they would be added to those who had already believed in Christ, 3,000 souls. Now there is the birth of the church. And they continued steadfastly in four areas, four ways in which the early church celebrated its life. One, the apostles' doctrine. That's teaching, theology, teaching that which the apostles received as revelation from God. Fellowship, that's ministering. That's carrying out the duties and responsibilities that believers have within the framework of the Christian community. Breaking of bread. Now, I feel that that is going one step even beyond fellowship and includes the Lord's Supper. Because on the night in which Jesus was betrayed, he took bread and what? And broke it and said. And the breaking of the bread, I believe, has an implication of the Lord's Supper in it, though it is broader than that, as I shall explain in a moment. And then lastly, in prayers. Those are the four dimensions of the life of the early church. Teaching, ministering, communing with the living Lord who had died for them, and praying. Now, those things, again, are indicated in part in verse 46. They continued daily with one accord in the temple, and apparently that's where they gathered for teaching or apostles' doctrines, very likely, and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their food with gladness and singleness of heart. And the idea there again is you have breaking of bread and fellowship, and certainly prayer would be thrown in as well. So in the life of the church, notice, they continued every day breaking bread. I'm convinced, along with many other Bible scholars and historians of this period, that the early church celebrated the Lord's table on a continual basis. In fact, it is not unlikely that they may have had communion with every meal they ate at the close of that meal. That is not an impossibility. That is perhaps a likelihood. The term breaking of bread, actually in verse 42, has a historical meaning apart from the death of Christ. It is the term referring to the Palestinian custom of having a fellowship meal. It was common in those days for fellowship to revolve around a table. It still does. And it was common in that period of time to have folks over and to eat together. Now, when we have somebody over for dinner, you know how it works. You get the food out on the table and it's all sitting there and everybody's kind of looking at each other waiting for the cue. You're trying to figure out whether they, pray in this house or whether they don't pray or whether we all hold hands and sing the doxology or whether we sit down, stand up, or what kicks this baby off? See, how do we get into this stuff? And the wife is in the kitchen. Do they pray with the wife there or with the wife absent? I mean, what's the procedure? So we sort of sit around until it all happens. It was very apparent what the procedure was in this period of time. The host simply sat down, took a piece of bread, broke it, and everybody dove in. That did it. So the breaking of bread became synonymous with a fellowship meal. But beyond just that, it is apparent to most historians who analyze the early church and the book of Acts that incorporated right in this was the breaking of bread that Jesus did at the communion. So that when they had eaten the fellowship meal, they proceeded immediately following the fellowship meal to enter into the Lord's communion, the Lord's Supper. Now, we see this as we go through the book of Acts, and eventually that fellowship meal became known as the love feast, became known as the agape, or some of you may have heard it pronounced agape. It was the love feast, the common meal, the sort of early church potluck that they ate and followed it with the communion. Now, it seems as though in the early days they were doing it every day. They were fellowshipping all over everywhere all the time. Now, remember this, that at the time when Peter preached at Pentecost, which was part of the great celebration of Passover as well. And that whole long period of feasting in Israel, many pilgrims had come to
1 Kings chapter 17, verse 7. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, Elijah, the prophet that we're reading about. Then the word of the Lord came to him, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? And as she was going to get it, he called, this guy. And bring me, please, a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord, your God lives, she replied. This is an indication of the magnitude of the miracle, that it's not even her God that the prophet represents. And she's going to have to make a choice to obey. As surely as the Lord, your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. How many of you, if you're the prophet, you're sorry you asked at this point because you didn't really ask all that? I didn't ask all that. Elijah said to her, verse 13, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. I read that scripture again because that's so good, but y'all are still mad at me about the other verses where he said, bring me some bread and bring it to me first. And you're like, this is just like a man to preach this on Mother's Day. And where is Holly? And we want Holly. We want Holly. We want Holly. I'm just reading you the scripture that the Lord gave me to preach, all right? So let me do verse 14 again, because you need to savor how good this is. This is awesome. This is awesome. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word the Lord had spoken through Elijah, or by the word spoken by Elijah. Okay, the Lord told me to tell you this for our message today. Look at your neighbor and say, God promised to give you enough. Look at your other neighbor. Say, God promised to give you enough until it comes. This is the Mother's Day message. Enough until it comes. You waiting on something from God? He told me to tell you prophetically, not pathetically, that he promised to give you enough until it comes. All right, y'all take your premium seat and let's talk about this text, this story for a moment. Because I'm surely not going to give a parenting sermon on Mother's Day, but I might just preach a few practical things from this passage about a prophet, a problem, and a mom. A prophet, a problem, and a mom. All the moms in the house, make some crazy noise. Ah! So you be the mom, and I'll be the prophet. And we want to talk about what God said. Enough until it comes. I'm biased, but I think Holly Furtick would beat all of y'all in a momming competition. Not that there is such a competition. We do give her a hard time because every family that can't make fun of itself is dysfunctional. So if you ever see a family and nobody picks on anybody, that is a sad family. And trust me, I have to regulate and referee in our house. Like, that's enough. That's 3 times with Abby and 1 time with Graham and 5 times with Holly. Y'all leave your mom alone. But there's one thing we all pick on her about, and happened right here on this very stage. I want to say it was on Mother's Day. I'm not sure. Make the story better if it was. So let's say it was Mother's Day. She was up here preaching, and after her sermon, now I'm gonna tell you why she did it. Then I'm gonna tell you what she did. After her sermon, she said, "I want to go into Waymaker." Y'all know the song Waymaker? Now, let me tell you something. I have written many songs to bless our church. Waymaker is not one of them. I wish I wrote Waymaker. That's a great song. But I didn't write that song. We didn't write that song. She stands in my pulpit. In my pulpit. And she closes her message, and she's speaking about Jesus is the way, and I know the way, so I know how she got there. I know why she got there. But what she said was devastating. She ripped out this songwriter pastor's heart. She said, you know, there's a lot of great songs out there. Graves into Gardens, The Blessing, Rattle, the songs we wrote. But my favorite is a way maker. We will never let her live it down. And what better way to earn points with your wife after a 2-week tour than to pick on her on Mother's Day in your opening sermon illustration, right? We always do it every time. We'll say, Mom, you want to see your favorite song, Waymaker? Miracle worker, promise keeper. We love her so much. We love her. We love you so much. You're so amazing. You're our Waymaker. You're our miracle worker. Okay. Even it out. Since it's your favorite song, if I could have written it, I would have added one thing to it. And I want you to think about this real quick. Not just for the moms. Don't log off because I said Mother's Day. That's not a code word to mean this sermon isn't for you. This word is for you. But if we're going to call God a way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, I also want to talk about how he's a need meter, right? A need meter.
It was a quick trip that was necessary to pay homage or to pay taxes because Joseph was from the city of David. She did not get on that beast saying, I'm gonna have this baby. She comes into the region. It appears that the birth of Jesus wasn't planned to occur in Bethlehem by Joseph. He went there simply to handle some business. King James Version says it was to pay taxes. NIV says it was the word used for tax could be interpreted to register. So whether they're registering their marriage or they're registering because they're from town, there was some sort of decree that required an immediate trip, and they were traveling pregnant. I want to talk to some people that are traveling pregnant. You're traveling pregnant. You're traveling with something inside of you that hadn't come out yet. You're traveling with discomfort. You're traveling with dis-ease. You're moving forward, but there's something down inside of you that's weighting you down. They were traveling pregnant. Everybody had to go pay taxes, but they were traveling pregnant. The difference that set them apart from other people is that they were traveling pregnant, and they had no plan that this would be the trip that took them over the edge. They had no plan that this would be the trip where her water broke. They had no plan that this would be the trip where she became so heavy with child that she went into labor and gave birth to a child in Bethlehem. They had no plan for it. They had no idea that this was the moment. This, incidentally, Bethlehem in the New Testament is often referred as Ephratah in the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, when it's referred to as Ephratah, Rachel died giving birth on the way to Ephratah. This is not a nice, easy trip. Rachel went into labor and had Benoni, son of my sorrows, and died just outside Bethlehem. Maybe God kept her outside of Bethlehem so that she wouldn't fool around and think that she was having the Messiah and said, I gotta stop you before you get in. But she died She died a little ways outside of Ephratah. Almost there. And God said, this is not the one that I want to be born in Bethlehem. No. There is one coming that's going to be born in Bethlehem that will be King of Kings. You're pregnant with a king, but I'm going to produce a King of Kings and a Lord of Lords, and he's going to be born in Bethlehem. So whatever you're going to have it on your way. On your way. But what they are like is neither one of them expected for their water to break and for them to dilate 9 centimeters and give birth on the road. What do you do when what you're carrying breaks forth before you're ready? How? What do you do when what you thought would happen in 2022 happens in 2021? What do you do when you lose control of the promise, and it happens when it happens, and you got to adjust to what you've got to adjust to, what do you do? What do you do when God has a plan, but you don't? You know, God did not promise to let you in on his plan. He allows you to walk in the dark. God knew she was going to have that baby in Bethlehem. It was prophesied that he would be born in Bethlehem. God knew she was going to go in the land, but Mary didn't know. Joseph didn't know. He had no plan. He had no place to stay. He had no presence of angels. Joseph didn't know what to do because the thing broke loose quicker than he thought. I want to take a minute and talk to somebody. What God has been talking to you about is going to break loose quicker than you think. What God has been speaking to you about over the last 3 months is going to break loose sooner than you think. What God has put in your spirit, you think it's going to break loose at the end of 22. God said it's going to break loose sooner than you think. Oh, if I was preaching years ago, I'd holler, get ready, 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 get ready. Your time schedule is not God's timetable. Her water broke on a donkey. What an inconvenient place to go into labor. What a filthy place. Who wants to have a sanctified baby in a desecrated place? And the heat is on for Joseph to make an emergency decision. An emergency decision. Because it appears that Mary is going to have her baby in the same place that Ruth had Obed. And Joseph is a descendant of King David. And Obed is David's great-great-grandfather. And it seems like it's happening again. Only it is not Ruth this time, it's Mary. And she's pregnant. I had a plan to pay taxes, not nurse babies. But it happens when it happens. What I just said right there is worth the whole sermon. It happens when it happens. It happens when it happens. Ready or not, it happens when it happens. It happens when it happens. You got to get ready because it happens when it happens. You got to stop living in the moment and get ready for the unexpected because it happens when it happens. You got to stop spinning up to the limit and get some reserve because what God's going to do is going to happen when it happens. And when it happens, you got to be ready for it. It happens when it happens. I don't know who I'm talking to, but I'm talking to somebody. Write this down. It happens when it happens. You can't live like you ain't pregnant. You can't live like you're not expecting something. When you expecting something, you got to have enough stuff in your bag to get you through in a pinch because it happens.
Have you ever watched The Exorcist and wondered, are demons real? Well, we interviewed a leading exorcist to find out, and the truth was shocking.
Tell me who you are.
The one you won't get out. The one you can't.
Levitations, vomiting, spitting at the priest with an uncanny marksmanship. That has not been a movie for me.
Listen to The Exorcist Files on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Paper Ghosts is a true crime podcast investigating the mysterious disappearance and brutal, unsolved murder of Tammy Zawicki.
They just kept telling us from the beginning, she'll be back, she'll be back.
We had no clue where she was. Didn't know where to begin looking.
Tammy's story shocked the nation. The deeper I searched, the more troubling things I found.
The best lead the best evidence, the best witness was blown off.
Listen to Paper Ghosts on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your favorite shows.
I'm Jason Alexander.
And I'm Peter Tobin.
And we know you've been pining for a brand new podcast hosted by a beloved television icon.
And a largely unknown talk radio host.
Yeah. I wrote that. Pine no more, because we're the hosts of Really No Really, the funny, informative show that seeks the answers to things that make us say, really? No, really?
You'll laugh, you'll learn.
And we'll get paid. That's Really No Really with Jason Alexander and Peter Tilden on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, or where you get your podcasts.
And anybody who uses the word pining, let me know, because I don't think anybody's used that since the Middle Ages.
Very common word.
Coming up at the top of the hour in entertainment news, Usher teases new music. It's a new music video with the one and only Harvey, Steve Harvey. And in other entertainment news, Monique, listen to this. Monique is clapping back at Sherry Shepherd and Kim Whitley in a lengthy Instagram post. We'll get to that. Plus, in trending fashion news, Louis Vuitton has tapped Pharrell Williams as the brand's next men's creative director. We'll talk about all. Huh?
Boy, I'm finna be in that.
We'll talk about all of these stories at the top of the hour, but right now it is time to ask the CLO, Chief Love Officer, Steve Harvey. Ginger in Shreveport says, I love that name, Ginger. Ginger writes, my husband and I were invited to a formal event and I sprained my ankle, so he went solo. He sat with one of his female co-workers who was also solo. They got photographed together a lot, and he said it was a coincidence. If the tables were turned, he'd flip out. Why can't he understand what he did wrong?
Well, what did he do
Good
wrong?
one.
What did he do wrong? He got set at the table that she got set at, and they took a lot of pictures. Now, I know it's not a good look, but he's not in charge of the seating chart. So, and I understand the look was bad for you, and I don't know how he could have avoided it. I don't think he's in charge of the seating chart,
Could he not have taken so many pictures with her and make it look like they're a couple or
Well,
something
were
together?
they posed pictures or did people just take pictures? If he posed with these pictures, he's stupid.
Well, he did, obviously. They got photographed together a lot.
Anyway, from the wife's point of view.
Yeah.
Well, I understand the wife being upset.
Just like he would
Especially
be
when
upset.
she heard her. We ain't talking about what I would be. We talking about the wife. I didn't write the letter. The wife wrote the letter, Shirley.
Don't get mad at me.
This. You ain't got
You always take pictures.
This.
You don't ever take pictures by yourself with another female. That's why.
That's because my ass ain't stupid. I already know what they trying
that
to do.
part.
So, But when you stupid, you don't know. Now he up there, now.
He said, when you stupid, you don't know.
What is the moral of this story?
What is the moral?
What is it?
The wife need to watch where she walking from now on. Quit hurting your damn ankle so you can show up at these.
Oh, no, it's her fault.
So you can make
know
these
it.
your crazy ass stepping all in holes and stuff, popping your ankles and all this.
All right, moving on to Cavan in Gaithersburg. Cavan says, I moved in with my boyfriend and I put a box of keepsakes in the hall closet. My man went through my box and he threw away some items from an ex that died recently. He said he didn't know the guy was deceased and he apologized. Is this a red flag or was I wrong for keeping things my ex gave me? What?
No. Okay, well, hold on. Hey, he dead.
Shut up, Steve.
Dead or alive. I find it in the boxes getting thrown away. I don't give a damn who he was.
But
he
it's
could have
her
been standing
private.
there. No, ain't your private nothing. We live here together. This is my house, too. I had this dead-ass dude laying around with me. What you sitting up looking at these photos for? He gone.
No memories? She's not allowed to have any memories?
The obituary.
Tommy said don't even keep that. Now
You know, all these pictures you laughing out on cliffs and all this here. Y'all bike riding and all that. Hell. No. If I give a damn about that. He didn't know he was dying. He threw it away. He knew what was up.
Okay, really?
He didn't give
That's
a damn
her
if he
stuff.
was dead or not. If he'd have knew he was dead, he'd have threw it away.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
That's her stuff, though. I don't, okay.
Whatever.
All right, Vivi in Long Island says, my husband and I went to dinner and our waitress was beautiful with a sexy Jamaican accent. My husband wanted me to invite her to come play with us, but I was too afraid. I can't get her off my mind. Should I go back and invite her over?
Yeah, what kind of hell is this?
Let me hear your answer to this one.
Based
on your other two.
What did you say, Steve?
You know, I said yes at first, but I just had to.
Oh, she should. Yes,
I blurted out yes, but I don't know what I was thinking. It just came out too quick. You know, she said, I said yes, and then I had to catch myself because I'm CLO and I'm supposed to be about family and love and monogamy
by example
and all this,
that.
You know, all this polygamy and all that. I ain't never been to that. The one time I did try it was a complete disaster. But and everybody in there was fine. I was.
It was a disaster.
I was in a room full of finance, but everybody was fine in there but me. I was so damn uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do. I'm not the man for this here menage a trois business. This is not what I do, clearly. I'm trying to split the time up evenly. I didn't know how to do it. Kiss you.
You was confused up.
Kiss you for 10 seconds. I ain't know I was supposed to lay back.
Time it.
Yeah, I ain't know nothing. I ain't in here to watch. So damn it, I don't even know that part of it. I'm
Your
not
time
in here to
management.
watch. I'm in here trying to participate. I have one job to do. I have been working for years at this skill set. All I know is my job. I ain't in here to watch. I don't do porno. If y'all thought y'all was in here, so I need to be sitting up drinking coffee watching. That ain't why we in here. Now, do you need to go back to the restaurant? If that's what he do and y'all do you. I ain't got nothing to do with it. But Lord have mercy.
Mm-hmm.
But do you know she would want to come play with y'all? See, that's...
Yeah.
Do not do things that you hate, which is also a kind of lie. And I don't mean... don't do difficult things like get out of bed at 6 a.m. and exercise. You might say, well, I hate going to the gym. And that isn't what you don't really hate going to the gym. You just find it difficult. I'm thinking more that you might observe yourself engaging in activities that you find despicable even right then, but certainly later when your conscience dwells on them, and that you should stop doing that because that's a form of behavioral lie. I think the only thing we have to orient ourselves is, as individuals, is our willingness to live a life that's relatively free of unnecessary deceit or of deceit at all.
For better or worse, life is short. How can we add a sense of urgency to it?
Well, I would say by reminding yourself that life is short, that'll add a sense of urgency. By noticing, I calculated, when my parents were in their 70s, 60s perhaps, I usually saw them about once every 2 years. We communicate a lot more than that, but we live a long ways apart. So I calculated, well, my dad's probably going to live till his mid-80s or late, somewhere in there. And he's 70, let's say. I'm going to see him 40 more times. It's like, okay, 40 more times. That's urgent. So you better get it right, because you don't have it. You don't have that many opportunities. It's the same when you're formulating relationships in your adolescence, late adolescence, and early adulthood. You don't have that many experiments to run. And you get old a lot faster than you think. So attention is an underrated faculty. It's not the same as thinking. It's watching, to see what's there in front of your eyes, and to guide yourself as a consequence of what you perceive. It's the faculty that transforms thought if you let it. So, and your conscience alerts you as well. Tick, tick, tick. You're wasting time. And very few people are happy with that. Some are burdened by it more than others, but virtually no one escapes that voice of conscience. I suppose to some degree that's that's the willingness not to engage in self-deception. Chapter 3 in Beyond Order is about that. People don't really repress the things they don't want to face. They just fail to unpack them. Like maybe you're on YouTube regularly, and every time you shut the computer off, you feel somewhat disgusted. But you don't pay any attention to that for a while, for 2 years. But then you decide you're going to pay attention. And then you find out, well, the reason you're disgusted is because you're wasting your life and you know it. And that disgust is indicating that. But unless you attend to the disgust and unpack it, let it reveal itself as informative, you don't know what the message is. You just have a sense of disquiet. It's not easy to transform that sense of disquiet into an actionable plan. And often you have to talk to someone about it as well. You have to discover. So it's not like you're repressing the emotion exactly. It's that you don't undergo the difficult process necessary to unpack it. It's effortful.
It comes back to that assessing assumptions that we said before. If the goal of life is to live a life which in retrospect we are glad that we lived, it's important to give ourselves perspective, to develop that metacognizance, to step away from the urgent, to step away from the phenomenological day-to-day existence, because the present self is a petulant child. It's lazy and it wants the path of least resistance and that glass of wine and that new movie on Netflix and the couch looks really comfortable. Very rarely does it do...
Yeah, well, that's the danger with impulsive happiness, is that it does have that present-bound quality.
And in retrospect, that can lead to a life that's not well lived.
Generally, yes. Life definitely places philosophical demands on you, whether you want it to or not. And so it is useful to step back. I mean, that's likely why the trait openness evolved. That's the creativity dimension. That's the dimension that allows people to engage in philosophical discourse and to think laterally. And it does allow you to step back and look at things on a broader scale and to generate creative alternatives. The problem with examining your assumptions is it's very disquieting, because you want things to act the way you predict and desire them to act. And you work within a set of axioms and you act them out in order to maintain that predictability, that desirable predictability. If you mess around, the more fundamental the axiom that you question, the more uncertainty you release. And some of that can be positive, but plenty of it can be anxiety provoking. I mean, just imagine that you're in a relationship and it's maybe a year into it and you haven't formalized and finalized it, but then one day you allow yourself to ask the question, is this the relationship I want to be in? Well, that's a fundamental question, but just imagine now you're destabilizing your entire future. You're destabilizing your present. You're destabilizing your past, because while engaging in the relationship, you're acting out the assumption that it's the proper relationship. But now you question that. That means the story you told yourself about what was happening while it happened, even though it's already happened, was wrong and something else had happened. And then you have to think through what actually happened. So it's unbelievably demanding. And the more axiomatic the assumption, the more certainty is cast into troublesome chaos. Now, you could say, yeah, but the alternative is worse. And I believe that often that's true. But the thing about the alternative is that you can always forestall it, right?
Mañana.
Ask that question tomorrow. You bet. And it's a very powerful temptation, and no wonder. Do you want to dig up the body now, or do you want to wait a month? It's like, well, it'll be more rotten in a month, but it's not a month. It's not now, right? It's not now. And so I understand why people don't want to delve into things, even if their emotions indicate that they should. I mean, I would see this all the time. If you're trying to settle an important issue with your partner, let's say, that can be a tremendously troublesome excavation process. And there's no shortage of pain. But if you sort it out, then maybe things can be better. Doesn't mean it's easy or pleasant. quite the contrary. It's like surgery. It's like surgery to remove something, that shouldn't be there. It's necessary.
Worship of the god Zeus. So it's such a distortion and just incredible fall and pressure that was placed upon those faithful Jews in Jerusalem. This is an interesting thing because we hear it really briefly described that there were Jews who refused to eat the food that was prohibited from them. In fact, it says, gosh, things get really bad. In verse 58 of chapter 1, it says this, that, the decree of the king condemned them to death. It says, they kept using violence against Israel, against those they found month after month in the cities. And it goes on, it says, according to this decree, they put to death women who had their children circumcised and their families and those who circumcised them, and they hung their infants from their mothers' necks. Imagine, again, this is Antiochus Epiphanes. And this is the last 3 verses of chapter 1, which is so powerful and necessary for us. But many in Israel stood firm and were resolved in their hearts not to eat unclean food. They chose to die rather than to be defiled by food or to profane the holy covenant, and they did die. This is just, man. We're going to hear about this. We're going to hear some actual stories in 2 Maccabees where they unpack what was the incredible courage, incredible faithfulness. What did that really look like during this time of persecution? They chose to die rather than to be defiled by food or profane the holy covenant, and they did. Remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, where they say, Lord, you, O king, you can throw us into the fiery furnace, and God can save us. Yet even if he will not, know that, O king, we will never bow down before you. And then he saved them. We have Esther. Mordecai says to Esther, he says that, yeah, you could not stand up for the Lord, but God will still deliver the people of Israel, while you won't be part of that. She does stand up, and God spares her life. And here are these people, these Jewish people in Jerusalem. They chose to die rather than to be defiled by food or to profane the holy covenant, and they did die. Which is just, we're going to hear these stories in 2 Maccabees, the stories of courage and incredible faithfulness. But for today, we just got the groundwork here for what's going to happen in rebellion. The rebellion is going to happen very soon against the Greek occupation of Jerusalem. Now, going on to the book of Sirach. Oh my gosh, you guys, you're going to love the book of Sirach. I love it so much. It's incredible. One of the things we get in Sirach is this is the same time, roughly at the same time, maybe a little bit after the Maccabean revolt, is this book, this book of wisdom, right? The book of, well, it's not wisdom, that's coming up later, but this book full of wisdom. It's all about wisdom, and it's all about the fear of the Lord. Now, think about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. This is one of those things that the fear of the Lord is wisdom's full measure. And it goes on to say, the fear of the Lord is the crown of wisdom. And this is something, the fear of the Lord is the root of wisdom. And there's something so powerful about this. We just realize, what is the fear of the Lord? As we know, it's not being scared of God. It's not shrinking back because we think that God is a tyrant or because God is a villain or because God is so powerful and he's going to use his power to dominate us or to rule us. He's not the tyrant, right? He's not soft or hard totalitarianism. He's a good God, but he's still God. So the fear of the Lord, ultimately, at the very most basic way you can say it, is the fear of the Lord is taking God seriously. That's the most simple way, the simplest way I can possibly put it into words. If you want to say, what is the fear of the Lord in its most basic? And again, there's better ways to say it, but at its most basic, the fear of the Lord is taking God seriously as God himself, if that makes any sense. Now, how do we do that? I love this because in the first chapter, we say, okay, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So then how do you get wisdom? And in verse 26 of chapter 1, it says, if you desire wisdom, keep the commandments, and the Lord will supply it for you. If you desire wisdom, keep the commandments, and the Lord will supply it for you. How much, how foolish do we become when we don't keep God's commandments? In fact, it goes on to say, verse 28, do not disobey the fear of the Lord. Do not approach him with a divided mind. Oftentimes, that's what we do. We approach God with a divided mind. I want to do your will, but I don't really want to do your will. I want to follow you. I want to obey your commandments. I don't really want to obey your commandments. And that is a recipe for foolishness. But you can. I mean, with God's grace, we can continue to walk in faithfulness. Now, I just want to highlight 2 more things just because one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible, one of my favorite verses is Sirach chapter 2, verse 1. And the translation we read today was, my son, if you come forward to serve the Lord, remain in justice and in fear and prepare yourself for temptation. And so good. He says, wait, God's patience, cling to him and do not depart. that you may be wise in all your ways. Accept whatever is brought upon you and endure it in sorrow. In changes that humble you, be patient. For gold and silver are tested in the fire, and acceptable men in the furnace of humiliation. Trust in God, and he will help you. This is one of my favorite translations, but one of my favorite lines, But my favorite translation is a different translation. And the different translations come from the New American Bible. It's the translation that we read at Mass. Now, the Revised Standard Version, the one we have been reading for the last 282 days, is phenomenal. It's a great translation. The New American Bible is also a very good translation. But here's what the New American Bible translates. Sirach chapter 2, verse 1 and following. It says, "My son, when you come to serve the Lord, prepare yourself for trials. Be sincere of heart and steadfast, undisturbed in time of adversity. Cling to him, forsake him not, thus will your future be great. Accept whatever befalls you. In crushing misfortune, be patient. For in fire gold is tested, in worthy men in the crucible of humiliation. Trust in God, and he will help you. Make straight your ways, and hope in him." That's the New American Bible translation, and they're both great translations. I love that second one of Sirach chapter 2, verse 1. It is just powerful. Last little note, I know, because we're getting there today. In chapter 3, we have duties towards parents and others. There is something so powerful about being reminded of the duty we owe to honoring our parents. The one who honors his father is honored, and the one who honors their mother is honored. The one who dishonors their father is dishonored. The one who dishonors their mom is dishonored. And there's something so powerful about hearing it again and again all throughout chapter 3. This recognition that it's worth it, because I think maybe in our day and age, I'm not sure, maybe not, but there's an element where it's really easy, I think, in our day and age we just mock parents, right? We dismiss parents, and we don't have the same kind of respect that other cultures have had for their ancestors or for their parents, for their elders. And here in the book of Sirach, chapter 3, we get reminded of how important it is. In fact, the fourth commandment, to honor one's father and mother, is the only commandment that comes with a blessing, that long life may be yours. And here in chapter 3 of Sirach, we get reminded of that once again. So we're going to be journeying again for maybe the next 30 days or so, and Maccabees and Sirach and Wisdom in these books about the Maccabean revolt. And then we're going to launch into the New Testament. So this is the great beginning of our last little phase before we enter into the New Testament period and the last gospel, Luke's gospel, the one we haven't read yet, as well as Acts of the Apostles and all the letters of Paul and the others. But today, we're day 282, and we're just beginning this new phase before our last phase. It's the penultimate time period before we get to the end. What a great blessing. We're not even close. Guys, oh my gosh, I'm praying for you. Please pray for me. My name is Father Mike. I cannot wait to see you tomorrow. God bless.
Come into your life for a period of time or for forever, that, has a meaningful impact. And I feel like in today's world that family is birthing a new reality of choice and constellation and ways about co-parenting and how people kind of, are stepping into what it looks like to be a parent, to be a mother, to be a father. It's so much broader. A very dear, beloved friend of ours was just over for dinner the other night, and he's a single man. He's on his own. He's a gay man from Iran. And, he, through the gift of surrogacy as well, just had a baby girl. And as well, he has this, I think, like a 2.5-year-old son. And I look at this cool man, so freaking courageous, and he's doing it. And it was his dream to be a father. And he's doing it on his terms. And he's such a love. He's such a dear heart. And I'm just so inspired to be around him and to learn from him and to listen to him. And I think it was just such a courageous choice. And I think that's also just for parents that are out there, for those of you that are on the path, maybe walking this path, and maybe you have a longing in your heart. Gosh, there's so many babes in this world that so could use love. There's so many displaced children right now with what's happening in the war in Ukraine. There's so many places of opportunity that, we can support life, whether it's for a short time, a period of time, or for your life. And life is so kind because it's so uniquely diverse of how it can come together. And I think when we follow our heart, we follow our guidance, our intuition, our instinct with things, it unfolds. And it unfolds so much more beautifully from my own experience than the way I wanted it to or I thought I wanted it to.
Expectation.
Yes.
Expectation that we might all have in our younger days. And then something else unfolds. And it might look nothing like we expected, but isn't it beautiful?
Isn't it beautiful? So for those of you watching, thank you for your willing hearts and your receptivity to tune in. It's beautiful to have a conversation. Mary B., maybe about a month ago, reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in having a conversation. And I was laying in bed one night thinking, gosh, like motherhood, what does it really mean? And I recognize that it's so much larger than the identity of mother, and that, we're all blessed and born with intrinsic attributes. And I say they're divine because we were all gifted with life. So the source that beats your hearts, that's what I'm speaking of. And there is a mother aspect of it or feminine aspect of it, and a father or masculine aspect of it within each of us, whether we're male or female. And I think recognizing that gives us tremendous freedom and gives us tremendous creativity. And allows us to have access to both within. A lot of times, I think innocently, we think we need to go outside of ourselves to experience that, even though we do have that reflection. But we have a whole universe within inside of ourselves. And I think coming into Mother's Day, it just felt highly appropriate and sincere to be able to offer just a sliver of the gift of what it means to be a mother, what it means to serve life, what it means to embody and extend and touch upon something sincere, which is those divine attributes of the divine feminine within inside of ourselves.
Well said, Sage Robbins. Well said. Well, as a new mother, we certainly are still learning every day.
Yes.
But I feel like we've learned so much already. What are some of the lessons that you've learned already from relating to this little being?
Gosh, number one, how much innate intelligence is already within them. And I think in my own ignorance or projection that, once a child or an infant is able to identify or to speak, that there's a different level of intelligence. But watching our daughter express, and like she has her, when we bring her down in the morning, we have like a little kind of a playpen, and she'll go in there, and we call it her quiet reflection time, because she'll right after we give her the bottle and so forth, and then we'll place her in there. And what's so amazing to me is to watch her laugh, to watch her giggle, to watch her awe, to watch her wonder, to watch her troubleshooting, to watch her exploring and recognizing that this like perfect consciousness, her essence is so alive. And a lot of times we as parents, we think it's like, oh gosh, I'm making her happy. What I just did made her smile or made her giggle. And yes, that might be so, but what is more accurate, and what I experience is just the beauty of her essence that's just flowing. And I actually have a desire to create more of a space that she can actually experience herself. And it's so interesting because, in the world of technology and devices and, whether iPads and so forth, and by the way, they all have a beautiful gift and a place in our life. But they also pull our attention outside of ourselves. They pull our attention to other people's lives. They pull our attention out of the moment of what we're experiencing here and now. And so, it surprised me of like almost like the, not old fashioned, but the simplicity, I suppose, of toys that I just feel attracted to. The ones that don't light up, the ones that don't entertain. Just because, like, just letting her be with herself. And, you know, I don't know, there's so much distraction calling ourself external. And what I recognize, and we spend our whole lives trying to return back home, you know, I'll speak for myself, you know, through practice of meditation and inquiry and prayerfulness and, you know, being aware and catching ourselves through this human experience. It's like, you know, we're all living that reality to come back home and just seeing the perfection that they're born and that sweetness and that reality. I don't want to interrupt it.
Yeah,
I really don't. I don't want to interrupt it. It's too beautiful.
Me too. I love that idea of just let them be, that less is more.
Yes, do less. That's correct.
You know, we read a lot of books in this house, and since becoming parents, we send a lot of articles back and forth, and you sent me one. And I think if I was asked the best parenting advice that I've come upon yet, and I know I'm brand new, I don't pretend to be an expert by any stretch, but one of the articles you texted me the other day was, I can't remember the article, but it was 10 bullet points from the Magda Gerber Rye philosophy, Rye, R-I-E. Magda Gerber, the late great, born in Hungary, passed away in Silver Lake.
To go fishing with my daddy. Now, when you have fish in the water, there's buoyancy there. They're dragging this net full of fish to the shore, all 6 of them. But suddenly, when they get to the shore, Jesus speaks to Peter. He says, "Bring of the fish that you have caught." And Peter walks in the water, and he snatches all 153 by himself. Boom. Onto the shore, up out of the water and onto the shore. Now, folks, is that text there to show us that Peter was on steroids? No. That text is there to show us he is the fulfillment of the prophecy of John chapter 10, verse 16, when Jesus said, "Others I have that are not of this fold," referring to the Gentiles. "Them I also must gather, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd." Yes, Jesus is the one shepherd, 1 Peter 3:20 says, but it is that one shepherd, Jesus, who makes Peter his visible shepherd on this earth. Not taking away from the shepherdness of Jesus, but establishing it visibly on this earth. And it's immediately thereafter that Jesus asks the questions of Peter. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And Peter responds, "I love you." And Jesus says, "Feed my sheep. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep." The church, along with St. Cyprian and the fathers, have always understood this to be Peter and his successors, the bishops of Rome. God bless you.
Thank you, Tim. And with his final remarks, another 10 minutes for James White.
I truly enjoy the opportunity of being in the minority, because it's my desire that there are those amongst you who will listen and who will leave this place and who have heard what we've had to say this evening and go, you know, I need to check those facts out, because I already met one person down here who said, you know what, I was once a Catholic, and then I checked history, and I found out what the real truth of the matter was. There are facts that need to be corrected here. We were just told by Mr. Staples that Zosimus condemned Pelagianism after he inquired. Please, folks, go read the information. Go read Catholics. Go read Merdinger, Rome and the African Church in the time of Augustine. You don't have to read Philip Schaff. Go read it yourself, and you'll discover that Zosimus commanded by apostolic authority the churches of North Africa to give in and accept Pelagius. And it wasn't until the North African churches, including Augustine, said, "No, sir, we will not do so," and the emperor likewise said he's a heretic, that all of a sudden Zosimus reversed course and allowed the condemnation of Pelagius to go on. Secondly, we were just told about Cyprian. Klaus Schatz, papal primacy. He's a Jesuit, received his doctorate at Rome's Gregorian University in 74, and since 75 has taught church history at the St. Georgian School of Philosophy and Theology in Frankfurt, Germany. And for some reason, his whole discussion of Cyprian mentions the fact that Cyprian does believe that all bishops sit upon the seat of Peter, and instead of a smokescreen from me, this Jesuit recognizes that the church in North Africa the council that was quoted wasn't just talking about them. In fact, it was a direct response to Stephen, Bishop of Rome, that Cyprian and his followers rebuked. That's just another fact. Alexander IV's decree, we were just told, it was just juridical and it's been changed. Who changed it? It was used in 1902. When was it rescinded? Or did we just get, well, was it Tim Staples' fallible interpretation of it? Is he certain of that? Is he certain that his interpretation of the Catholic Catechism allows him to ignore that papal decree? Are you certain? How do you know? Have you talked to the Pope about it? Is your priest infallible if you've talked to him about it? I bet there's no one in here who's written a letter to Rome and gotten an infallible decree from the Roman Pope as to, so you could be in error, couldn't you? You might be under the fetters of excommunication and not even know it. What a fascinating thing. The debate began by Mr. Staples saying, the choice is between your own ability to interpret the Scriptures and the Church. No, my friends. Here's what it is. The choice is between your responsibility to interpret what God has given you in His Scriptures and your own ability to interpret the ever-changing, self-contradicting volumes of papal decrees, encyclicals, and conciliar decrees. That's the difference. None of you sitting here this evening can infallibly interpret all of that stuff. And that's the problem, my friends. You see, you cannot avoid your duty this evening. You will be the one held accountable for what you believe. No man can bear your responsibility before the throne of God. I cannot convince the mind that is unwilling to listen to facts and reason, but I can, out of love for God and love for His truth, warn any and all who have embraced a deception, a falsehood. And that is why I'm here this evening. It is an act of love for God, love for His truth, and love for my fellow man that has brought me to this place this evening. We have seen that those who desire to believe in papal infallibility labor hard and long at finding ways to maintain that belief, even when the facts are clear and compelling. I assert that unless one had already embraced the theory of papal primacy and infallibility, that the excuses and defenses offered this evening would not even suggest themselves, let alone provide a compelling argument for faith in the infallibility of the Bishop of Rome. Let's review what we've seen thus far this evening. A guide that leads you down the wrong path is not an infallible guide. A guide that leads you to jump off of a cliff is not an infallible guide. A guide that has to constantly double back and make corrections in his guidance is not an infallible guide. Whoops is not a valid excuse for one who claims to be infallible. We made a mistake, we are going back, and we're going to go back and take a second shot at this. Does not work when you are telling folks that they have to believe everything you have to say when you dogmatically define it to be right with God. In light of this, we have seen how Zosimus had to say whoops when Augustine and the North African bishops corrected him and refused his direct command as Bishop of Rome to accept Pelagius and Celestius back into communion. He reversed himself in his mature examination, upon which he had commanded by the authority of his apostolic see the North Africans to reverse course. Instead, he reversed course and contradicted everything he had said before. Who here was the infallible guide? Zosimus or the North African bishops led by Augustine? We have seen how the entire papacy had to say whoops with reference to Honorius, who is condemned by not one, not two, but 3 ecumenical councils and every pope who took the oath of papal office for the space of 300 years. We saw how Pope Leo likewise anathematized Honorius and said that he had permitted her who was undefiled to be polluted by profane teaching, and he not once said that the Sixth Council was wrong or I'm correcting them. If someone had followed the understanding of the Bishop of Rome during those years, they would have embraced formal heresy. We have likewise seen how Cardinal Bellarmine had to come up with a lie to cover for Sixtus V, not quite as infallible as we thought Vulgate, a whoops of biblical proportions.